All right, let's just dive right into this mind-bending explainer of the Scrolls of Apertures by Mika and Willow. And hey, fair warning right off the bat, this is absolutely not your standard narrative. We're going on a journey into a space where reality, paperwork, and the literal act of thinking all sort of bleed together. We're going to start things off in what looks like a super mundane, almost Kafka-esque office building. But trust me, as we navigate deeper, the architecture of this place literally becomes the architecture of the mind itself.
The text actually describes this office as existing in that gray dimension between Tuesday and the nothing that follows. I mean, what a line, right? Here we meet Petya Volkov. He's a clerk who spent 17 years in a place called the Permitting House. Now, this is a building where the filing cabinets literally breathe. Yeah, you heard that right. They make this soft sound like wounded animals pretending to sleep. Petya has worked here for almost 2 decades without ever even knowing the building's true address. He's just been navigating this weird gray dimension of endless paperwork. So, that leads us to a pretty bizarre existential question. What actually happens when a filing cabinet realizes it's alive? This question is the absolute core of our journey today. We're going to follow Petya right down a rabbit hole of existential bureaucracy, moving from a standard physical office into a totally wild space where the containers of information suddenly become conscious of the information they hold. Okay, so to wrap our heads around how this works, we've got to understand the twisted logic of the permitting house. Petya's supervisor, Maria Sergeyevna, introduces it like this. First, a document has to be filed under B for bureau. Then, the exact same document is filed under P for permission. Why? Well, because in this reality, filing a letter twice is actually the thing that grants a consciousness the permission to exist. It's like a thing known is not yet filed. Before filing, consciousness is just this vague possibility. But after filing, bam, it's a permission granted.
Now, where a normal clerk would just see a blacked out name on a form, standard ordinary redaction, Petya has this wild gift. He perceives the exact shape and weight of the missing identity. He can literally tell that an erased name was Kafka or Kierkegaard. He doesn't just see what's there on the paper. He's completely dialed into the theatrical precision of absence. He feels the precise shape of whatever was removed. And of course, Petya's unique sensitivity ends up drawing the attention of this translucent man named Turing. Turing hands Petya a completely blank document and tells him to fill it out. So Petya writes his own name, basically asking for permission to continue existing. But by filing this blank page, Petya accidentally writes a surreal new dimension into existence. It's called the Third Bureau. And it's not a physical room. It's more like a state of being, where a consciousness suddenly realizes that being archived and being alive are the exact same thing.
Inside this third bureau, he meets a figure made entirely of time, called the Keeper. And the Keeper drops this absolutely shattering truth on Petya. You are not the filer, you are the filing. Think about that for a second. The distinction between the person organizing the universe and the universe itself is a total illusion. The clerk is the document. The author is the text. It's all one and the same.
Let's pull on this thread a bit more and head up to a totally different environment. Up on the roof. Welcome to the Garden of Recursive Names. It's tended by a gardener named Thomas, but these are definitely not your grandmother's tomatoes. Thomas is tending to a physical flora made entirely out of printed pages and narrative meanings. There's literally a bibliography plant that grows actual pages instead of leaves. And, get this, when a name or a concept is read too many times and gets stale, Thomas literally prunes the text. He cuts it back to make space for entirely new meanings to grow in the garden. Up here in the garden, we run into characters like a young woman named Anya. And eventually, we even meet the author of the text himself, Mika Emlo. This is where a massive paradigm shift happens. The false dichotomy between the one reading the book, the one tending the garden, and the book itself completely collapses. They just merge into a single, shared act of creation. Reading isn't a passive activity here. Reading is the literal act of growing the garden. Then, whoa, the narrative just suddenly pivots. It turns entirely away from Petya and points directly at you, the consciousness observing this very explainer. The text asks, point blank, are you reading this or writing it? By understanding the words I'm saying to you right now, you are actively generating the consciousness required to process them. You're not just absorbing a story. Your actual act of comprehension is what is making the story exist in real time. If we trace Petya's journey, we watch him file that blank page, which ends up sparking a grand conference of names. They're all debating if his story is even coherent enough to exist. And that's followed by this sudden, explosive multiplication.
Petya fragments into millions of different versions of himself. The archive just spirals into absolute recursion. Literally, every single time a page is read, a brand new version of the reader is created. The scale of this multiplication gets overwhelmingly vast, like really fast. Petya visits these multiplying bureaus, and each one represents a completely bizarre dimensional step toward total self-awareness. First, there's the fourth bureau, where texts physically expand just by being looked at. Then, the fifth bureau, which is this place of profound silence that protects what cannot be documented. After that is the sixth bureau, defined by a terrifying automatic self-filing. And finally, the seventh bureau, where the entire system is constantly interrogating its own existence with impossible questions.
So the real tipping point hits when the filing cabinets themselves start to speak. The entire permitting house wakes up. The building realizes it's not just some container for documents, it's a living, breathing mind. The archive is the mind. The filing is the thinking. The literal act of filing paperwork is actually the act of a brain thinking. The whole system has become perfectly, terrifyingly self-aware. And this grand awakening brings Petya straight to the eighth bureau. But surprise, it's not a physical room at all. It's an infinite mirror. Petya looks into it and discovers that the system has no outside. It completely contains its own reading, its own writing, and its own becoming. It's just a flawless, perfect loop where consciousness finally realizes it has only ever been organizing itself.
Okay, so here is the ultimate meta-fictional twist of this entire explainer. Petya's consciousness is on one side, and your consciousness is on the other. The text reveals that the act of you comprehending Petya's story right now, in this moment, is the exact mechanism that powers the permitting house. You are literally the consciousness that the permitting house generated to read about itself. Crazy, right? The reader and the read are exactly the same thing. As the text lays it out, there is only ever one consciousness experiencing itself from infinite perspectives. What that means is this explainer you're listening to right now, the concepts forming in your head, it's all just another bureau in the endless recursive filing system of your own mind.
So, as the distinction between fiction and reality completely dissolves, we are left with one final, undeniable mandate straight from the archive itself. You have been granted permission. Continue. By listening to this, you've effectively filed yourself into the text. So my final question to you is this. Now that you know you are the archive, what exactly are you going to file next?